Morning, folks. It is check the date here. It is the 20th of May, about 9:30 here in Band-Aid and Baylor Twine Productions of Hardly Hollywood Studios in beautiful downtown Bowlby. And I want to today to try to put this second of probably two, but definitely three, maybe four separate analytical lectures or lecturettes that I put together on the first fugue from Paul Hindemith's Ludus Tonalis. And as I said before, I'm going to starting and focusing particularly on the first couple of lectures anyway, on rhythmic aspects of this particular piece. But we'll talk a little bit today, about some of the harmonic aspects of it as well, and some of the formal kinds of things that I've been noticing. But I want to start with, first of all, I want to talk, and on the topic of harmony, I hope people have taken to the habit of collecting old analysis anthologies. This is the 5th edition of the Burckhardt Music for Analysis. Yeah, pardon me, I'm getting over a cold, so I'll be doing that a little bit. Hope that's all right during the talk. But I want to talk. First thing I noticed was part of this, where at least the first part of this lecture, the second in a series of 3 or 4, the first part of this came from some of the notes in the Burckhardt musical analysis volume, and this partially reads, and again, this is from the 5th edition. The first fugue in C has a calm and gentle quality often found in Hindemith's music. What species of fugue is it? And what is the function of measures 30 to 34? How, in spite of its high degree of chromaticism, does the piece project C as its tonal center? And it was his question about the function of measures 30 to 34 that got me, that I noticed this. And I want to show you, in case it's too far back, when it's on the stand, I want to show you the sort of a reduction of the baseline of those measures 30 and 31. And you'll notice what you've got there is a series of sevenths, minor sevenths. There's a minor seventh, and then another minor seventh, and then another minor seventh. There's another minor seventh over here. But the ones that I'm most particularly interested in are those 3 across the measure. Let me show that up close again. And you can't help but notice that what's happening here is that the E down to D flat is an augmented second, and the D flat down to B flat is a minor third. And this kind of got me thinking, 7th chords. That's kind of like a sequence of sevenths going on there. And it's consistent, too, because they're a sequence of descending sevenths. Say that 5 times fast. And each of them move down 3 half steps, an augmented second there and a minor third there. So this sort of reminded me, and here it is again up close, so you see that. And what you've got there is it almost strikes me as being a kind of sort of like analogous to a sequence in tonal and especially Baroque and classical music. and as we know, sequences, or at least sequences, tend to be found a lot in modulatory passages. In fact, sequences are a good way. There are the various types of sequences you can have in music are good ways to get from one key to another. So I'm wondering, so that sort of got me interested in this. So is this a kind of modulatory function to measures? It was measures 30 to 34. Perhaps that's some kind of modulatory passage. Now, it's also true that in modulations, modulatory sections, or this is sort of a general comment about when in a section of harmonic or tonal stability, it's a common practice to present complete statements of the theme or the basic or the subject or the main idea or one of the main ideas of a piece of music. That happens a lot so the theme, complete themes appear in tone or in stable key areas. And in modulations, you often have fragmentations or developments of parts of the subject or the theme or whatever it is you're dealing with. And I want to talk a little bit about something I kind of noticed here in that some interesting things about motif A and motif B of the subject. And we noticed this already, that this in my previous analysis, motif A gets diminished rhythmically in what I at that point called the counter subject. And while it's not really a counter subject, but it's for lack of a better word, it's a counter subject that A diminished. And I found that then I noticed that if you dotted quarter eighth can be renotated as this, a quarter note tied over to an eighth note, right? And that is a renotation of this. Okay, so keep that in mind. This same kind of thing happens over here. Notice that in motif B, which is here, and that's the second measure of the fugue that you find in measure 2, you can renotate this as a tied note to a long note tied to a shorter note. So that this could be figured, this is B renotated. And then with the concept of something called Brechung, B-R-E-C-H-U-N-G, Brechung, which is German for breaking. It's an old elaborative technique that are discussed by various 18th century theorists and composition teachers. By Brechung, by breaking this quarter note into 2 eighth notes, you derive this. So renotated, broken, and then by breaking this down further, by taking that half note and breaking it into a quarter note, and then quarter rest, followed by a quarter note tied to those eighth notes again, you see a very, 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 very. They're clearly how these ideas derived from B are very, very, very nicely and smoothly and quite elegantly derived. And it's interesting to note that this gets used quite a bit, especially in measures 11 to 14 of the fugue, particularly in the alto and the basses, for lack of a better term for those voices, and in a kind of Stimmtausch. Stimm in German is voice, and Tausch or Tauschen is tossing, or to toss, or to throw. In other words, to toss voices from one voice to another. Where, like, say, the first time you see in measure 11 in the alto, you see this, and then it's repeated in measure 11, measure 12. That same basic, that derived, this clearly derived from B material. And then that gets put into the bass line in measure 11, 12, measure 13. And in measure 14, it's again restated in the bass. And so that these things get moved from the alto voice to the bass voice. Come on, wake up, wake up. Thank you. So that kind of developmental type of thing is interesting, and this precisely this kind of motivic fragmentation and fracturing is very, very, very common in fugues, particularly by Bach, but other Baroque and classical composers use this same kind of rhythmic development or elaboration, especially in their fugue subjects. Now we've already talked a little bit about how subject A, or the motif A from the subject, is diminished in the counter subject, and then renotated by breaking that into a quarter note tied to an eighth note. But it's also rather interesting to note that occasionally you'll also see it notated like this, a quarter note followed by an eighth rest and an eighth note. And so that this is a kind of varied, by replacing the held eighth note with an eighth rest, you derive this little idea with and hopefully you can see this, sub parts of that alpha and beta. And these things are often, with a fair, this particularly is found throughout various parts of the fugue, parts of the piece. And this one occasionally appears as well. So alpha, beta, progression of A, dim, R, varied 1, and beta followed by alpha as A, diminished, renotated, varied version 2. These fragments get moved around and varied and tossed around more consistently throughout the fugue than this, which I think would kind of make sense, because since this is the main or first idea introduced in the fugue, this one would logically be the ones that would be most highly developed or elaborated. And as I said, this kind of thing runs, you find this in various spots throughout the piece. So this kind of rhythmic, motivic type of thing I think can be really quite fascinating. And I would encourage folks to grab their scores of the Hindemith, either in the Burckhardt or in other scores, and to take a look at this and to sort of plot, sort of see how often these things get deployed and developed throughout the piece. Okay, all right. Well, I think that's it for part B of part 2 of my Hindemith analyses. And I hope you found this helpful and entertaining and interesting, stimulating. And the only other thing is to end with, and you may think that one of the main reason I do this is to show how smart I am, but it isn't. And the main reason I do all this kind of stuff is to be able to tell dumb jokes. And this dumb joke particularly harkens back to my undergraduate days. And I was sitting in my 20th century music history class, and my my teacher, Professor Owen Stevens at Acadia University, at one point mentions, one of the criticisms leveled at or observations, if not criticisms, or remarks made by people, musicians and experts, is that Hindemith students, of which there were a lot, all tend to sort of end up sounding kind of like Hindemith. And I was sitting in the back thinking to myself, so that's 1, little 2, little 3, little Hindemiths, 4, little 5, little 6, little... Well, you get the idea. And again, the main reason I do these kinds of analyses is to tell precisely those kinds of dumb jokes, which I just worked in there. See what I did there? All right. Anyhow, hope you're well, and I will look forward to boring you some more with my next installment of the series of analyses, and that one will talk more about some various harmonic aspects of this fugue that I think are really quite fascinating. But I wanted to start first with the rhythmic aspects of this, because in my view, in certain respects, rhythm sometimes gets the short end of the stick when it comes to analysis of music, of pitch-centered pieces like fugues, because the rhythms can also be as interesting and more stimulating to the composer's head, maybe, than they might think. All right, that's it for now. Like my shirt? All right, talk to you later. Bye.